welcome back to Always Watching. For those of you new to my channel, my name is Hamza Ali. I review all things movie and TV. So if you like what you hear, share, subscribe, and comment down below. But for today, we're talking about The Last of Us episode 5. I had very high expectations, and these expectations were met. I'm very impressed by the fact that they keep introducing us to new characters, getting us emotionally attached to them, and then killing them off. You know, even minor characters like Kathleen's side piece, you know, that one guy that doesn't say anything, but he has such a presence. Like, everybody on screen has such a way about them, and then they're gone. You know, usually with these types of shows, especially when you've kind of built our emotion, like when we're able to connect with characters like that, they take them along for the ride, right? By the 5th episode, you go from 2 people to like a gang of 6. But still, by the end of the episode, we only see Ellie and Joel. And I think this is a very smart way of building Ellie's character, because this is the episode that I became attached to Ellie. I became invested in her well-being, because up until now, it's been like the Joel show. And I think watching her grow through each interaction, and the longer they kind of go on this journey, I could actually see her growth. I was very depressed by the departure of Henry and Sam. I thought Henry's reasons for working with Fedra were very sound. You know, it was a tough situation, but I understood it. As usual, it's not what you do, but how you do it. And Henry's decision, I had to think about it, I think was a necessary evil, because his brother was sick. And I'm sure there were other avenues he could have taken, but I think he wanted a sure thing, right? Like, let's just say he worked with the revolutionary group and maybe they were able to steal the drugs or do something. What if it goes wrong, right? What if everything goes horribly wrong and his brother doesn't get the medication? So Henry's love for Sam is very clear in this sort of treasonous act that he committed. And I get the sense that Kathleen, you know, this was way too personal. I don't think Kathleen was a very well-written character, but to give her the benefit of the doubt, I think she was either very close to Henry, or Henry occupied some type of position within this revolutionary group, or she's just a bloodthirsty monster, right? So there's a scene when Kathleen is in her childhood home, and she admits that she was never a good person, right? Like, the contrast between her and her brother, we never see her brother, but we feel like we know him somehow. And she's talking about this room and how throughout their lives he kept her protected, and he was someone that would have done anything for her, which was an interesting contrast, especially when you remember Sam and Henry in that room, and Henry was trying to keep Sam safe, and they had all these drawings and all these things, trying to make this otherwise scary, sad room into something that felt like a home. There's a difference between a good person who does something bad, like Henry, right? Like, what he did was terrible, but I understood it. And a bad person who does bad things, like Kathleen. And when you think about the pandemic and, you know, especially a situation like this, sometimes it gives terrible people an excuse to be terrible, right? Like, sometimes when you think about the types of people that survive, it usually be the worst people, right? Like, where are all the good people at? And Kathleen, in her final speech, she said some horrific things. I mean, how bad is the world if you're like comfortable with kids dying of leukemia, right? Like, her thing was like, listen, it is what it is. Kids die all the time. I mean, at that point, Kathleen had no humanity, and she had no, it seems like she never had humanity to begin with. And this situation just kind of justified her lack of humanity. And there's a cruel irony here, right? So she's kind of lecturing. That's the thing about Kathleen's character. She likes to lecture, she likes to talk a lot, but in the end, she got killed by an infected child, right? And this whole idea of, you know, is one person worth all of us? Is this one person worth saving all of us? I mean, that's ironic, especially when you consider like the title of the show, The Last of Us, because you have Ellie, who could literally be the last of us because she's the only person who's immune to this disease. But then there's a bigger picture, right? Like, how many people with actual humanity that are worth saving are left on this planet, right? When you think about the departure of Henry and Sam, when you think about the departure of Frank and Bill, like, I'm not really sure this cure is worth it anymore. And Kathleen is so busy power tripping, she's so busy getting her bloodthirst on, that she kind of forgets about the bigger picture, right? She had multiple opportunities to kind of nip this in the bud. She knew that an outbreak was very much possible, but she kept it on the back burner, you know, just for one person, right? She risked everybody for one person. So just the irony of her speech was absolutely ridiculous. Sadly, in the end, you know, like that ending, I watched it twice and it hit me every time. Henry's efforts were in vain. Like they just made it out and then everything happened in the last 5 minutes. When you compare it to episode 3, it's quite a cruel flip of the script, right? So Bill decides to die with his partner Frank because he says, you were my purpose and there's really nothing else for me to do. And then you think about the end of this episode where, Sam was Henry's purpose, right? That's why he ended up in this mess. And without him, he has no purpose, right? So he ends up shooting himself in the face. So just the cruelty of that, I was like, oh my God. So this is the episode, as I said, that Ellie finally grew on me. I was surprised by her decision to keep Sam's infection a secret, right? Like you could tell that she kind of wanted to tell Joel, but because she was very emotionally attached to him, there was some hope that maybe he like her would be the exception to the rule. And that sort of childlike, let me put my blood on your blood and I can heal you. That was the moment I realized that Ellie doesn't know anything and that she just pretends to not be afraid and pretends to be this tough kid, but she doesn't understand things, right? And it was a very sweet moment. And watching Ellie sometimes, I don't know, I'm like, is this girl a sociopath? But then I realized this is probably, her demeanor is like a weird defense mechanism. Like she's not actually a bad person. She just sometimes behaves like a bad person. And the last thing I'll say about Ellie is that she adds a sense of calm that I didn't even realize until Henry and Sam were with the group, right? Like she kind of lightens the mood. You're not as afraid when you're around her. There isn't this tension. And she creates that sense of peace that makes this journey possible. So that was another thing that was highlighted, in this episode with Ellie that made me appreciate her more. So to start with, the timeline in this episode was very chaotic. There was a lot of things going on. And so my understanding is that the Kansas quarantine zone fell not long before Ellie and Joel arrived. And apparently Kansas QZ was the worst. Apparently they were abusing people, torturing people, doing all kinds of stuff to people until they were essentially cooed. And I was wondering why Kathleen was not more afraid of a possible outbreak. Like she's aware that something is bubbling beneath the surface, but I was like, why is it that she's not as scared of this as she should be? Like her side piece, I'm convinced that was her side piece, that her right-hand man, he was kind of scared. He's like, we need to deal with this right now. And I guess the one good thing that Fedra did here was they kind of drove the infected underground. I guess generally speaking, it's not that common to see an infected, right? Let alone a clicker. I guess there's different variations. Like someone just explained this. So this disease can progress. And there's a scene where Henry kind of says, oh my God, you saw a clicker and you survived. So if you're living in the QZs I guess Fedra has done a good job of kind of getting these infected as far away from these quarantine zones as possible. So I think the reason Kathleen wasn't as concerned with these infected is because they've never had to be concerned about them before, right? Like, so that was the only explanation, because I just didn't really understand how she could be more worried about this. Okay, so starting with Henry and Sam, shortly after the city's fall, Henry becomes public enemy number 1, and we kind of get some explanation into how that doctor in the last episode ended up in Kathleen's hands. So it seems like after the fall of the city, all the informants, all the snitches, they ran for the hills, right? And luckily for Henry and Sam, they know about this one secret hideaway, which isn't so secret anymore, because Kathleen is on the lookout and the doctor is there. And so I suspect that this is the same doctor that, helped Sam with the leukemia. And so their plan is to stay in this little room and until they run out of food, basically. And I guess the doctor somehow made his way out of this room and he was captured. And the longer that he's away, Henry kind of clocks the fact that, hey, we have to go. And so I like this room scene because it was a nice parallel to, like, you have all these people in these little rooms, right? So you have Henry and Sam hiding out. You have Ellie and Joel hiding out. And then you have Kathleen's raggedy behind talking about her childhood home. And it's really crazy to me that Kathleen could not give mercy to Henry and Sam. So just as they're about to escape, Henry sees Joel for the first time during that shootout. And I like this scene because, Henry sees his face quite clearly. And as soon as he sees Joel and as soon as he sees his ability to kill people, he's like, change of plans. We're going to go get that man and we're going to team up. Because Henry, he's still a kid, right? Like, he knows the way out. but he needs somebody to pave that way out. And so when Henry and Sam are able to, put a gun to Joel and Ellie's head, it makes a lot of sense because they knew exactly where they were staying, right? So Henry followed them, and so all the glass, all these things, these are measures to protect from strangers, right? So Joel didn't really anticipate that someone saw him doing that and that they were possibly followed. So, and there's a cute scene where Henry is trying to show Sam how to use his gun, right? Similar to how Ellie was, learning how to use the gun from Joel. So when they finally meet up, all four of them, it's probably one of the most awkward meetings ever. And I was impressed by how aggressive Henry was, right? So Henry is not there for food, right? He has the intent of working with these two to get out. And he tells them straight to his face, he's like, listen, the only person more wanted than me is you. And so we got to work together. And this is how I can understand Kathleen is a really bad leader, because after the fall of the QZ, there's really no order here, right? Like the fact that Joel and Ellie were even shot at like they were, there's nothing. There's no checkpoints. There's nothing, if people were wandering into the city, there's really nothing. Kathleen is just, she wants Henry and Henry only. So the morning after, I appreciated, just a side note, the change of scenery, right? So you get these apartment buildings, you get these small rooms, you get these tunnels, you get this boardroom meeting, right? I love how they kind of agree to this plan in this boardroom, and then the tunnel is through a bank. The more they're able to open up the world, the more real it feels, and the more nervous you are for them, because there's just so much empty space, and you don't really know who's hiding, right? You don't know who's lurking behind any corner. And for a time being, I actually forgot this was a zombie show. You kind of forget about the infected until the very end, because there's just so many other things that can kill you. So in this room, Henry basically informs Joel about everything. He tells him about the coup that happened. He tells him about the chaos that happened in terms of Kansas City and how terrible it was. And the one thing I noticed about Henry immediately is that he was very honest with Joel. He kind of tells him from the beginning, he's like, listen, I'm a collaborator, I'm a snitch. He doesn't try to hide or disclose this information. And even as they go on, he's very open about why he did what he did. And what I could gather is that he's a good person who feels very badly about what he did, right? The reason that he's so honest with Joel is because he still struggles with it. And that tells me that he has a conscience, right? He did what he did, but that doesn't mean he feels great about it, right? And I think that's why Joel kind of trusts him a bit, and then in the end agrees to let them come along, because he was just so transparent with everything. Henry's plan is very simple. And I like how they shot the scene, because that the infected are coming. Something is going to go down, but you just don't know when. So their plan is to go through these tunnels, exit, out the other side, and make their way across some pedestrian bridge, to freedom. And then they just kind of casually exit the tunnel. And this tunnel thing was really interesting, because I guess before the pandemic, a lot of people had the same idea that Bill had, where they would just kind of hide out underground, create these underground societies, but more likely than not, they were either infected or they were shot killed by the police or by Fedra. So whatever happened, these people are not there anymore. And also, there was no signs of the infected. So I guess they were pushed deep down underground. So that was the other thing. I'm like, where are these infected? When they exit the tunnels, they're chilling, and you're kind of chilling with them. You're like, wow, that was easy. Oh, is that all? That was just even Joel was like, well, I guess it all worked out. And there's still this weirdness up until the build up to the final scene, where you're like, okay, one of y'all is gonna get captured, someone is gonna die, but we don't know in what order, right? Because at some point Ellie tells them hey, you want to come to Wyoming with us? And Joel just gives her the look of death. He's like, excuse me? Why are you laying out our entire evil plan to these people? And I'm not gonna lie, when Henry said he was a collaborator and he was so forthcoming about it, there was that sense where, okay, if he were to get captured and Joel was to kill someone important within this 45-minute episode, and they know, and he knows they're going to Wyoming, you know what I mean? Like you didn't really know how much information, like how much they should trust each other yet. Like they were still kind of walking on eggshells. Whereas Ellie was pretty comfortable, right? She was happy to have other people along for the ride because it means that if something were to happen, there's less likelihood of her being alone. That's the thing, like how much, that's another question to think about, like how much can you trust people during a pandemic, right? Like what is the line between helping people and saving people and then self-preservation, right? Like there's just such a fine line between protecting yourself and helping others. Now the build up to this final scene, like this was a very well choreographed, well orchestrated scene. I like how they organically placed Joel as the sniper, right? Like nothing about this was intentional. It's not like he was like, let me get to higher ground and, you know, like I have this gun that I found on the ground. Like it just happened very naturally. And I also like that it was very unexpected, right? Because the idea is no one is this far out. And then suddenly they get shot at. And so when Joel is trying to break into the house, you know, like even the placement of the cars, like he's kind of ducking and hiding. This helped a lot. The fact that it was night also really helps on him, also helps. And I thought it was really interesting that Joel asked this old man to put his gun down, right? He was like, please put your gun down so I don't have to kill you. And I think all the things he's done is starting to weigh on him. Like he's getting tired of killing people. Like I don't think, again, he's not the Punisher. I don't think there's ever a point where he got used to killing. And so I think he was just tired. So I'm surprised that he didn't just shoot him right there, right? So clearly he's kind of done doing that. When Kathleen arrives with her gang, it feels like an impossible situation. And this sense of like sadness or this kind of walls closing in, it helps because you have these differing perspectives, because you have Joel with the bird's eye view and he's just like there's nothing we can do. And then you have the on the ground sort of perspective with Henry, Ellie, and Sam. And there's nowhere they can go, right? Like they can't really run from car to car. Like they're literally surrounded. So any movements, like they would be shot on sight. So the transition then between Kathleen's speech to the rise of the infected was really well done, because the infected, like they're triggered by this truck crashing. So when Kathleen arrives with her gang, you know, they're trying to clear the way. Joel is, you know, the sniper, and he's able to like basically shoot the person in the truck, which triggers this explosion, right? And I like how it didn't happen right away, right? So like the truck is there, there's fire, everything seems calm for a few minutes. And then slowly, as this fire keeps burning and burning, and no one thought to take out this fire. That's the other thing. It's like, you know that something is underground, but it was such a secondary consideration. So I like how they let it burn for a few minutes before unleashing the hounds or the infected. There was a lot of things about the scene that scared me. Like as soon as they started running, I was relieved. I was like, thank God. Like, thank God they got this break. And that bloater, I'm not gonna lie, that scared the living hell out of me. Like the fact that you could survive for 20 years and become this infected is absolutely terrifying. The fact that bullets weren't even helping. The fact that he ripped Kathleen's side piece, you know, his head clean off, was also quite terrifying. The fact that Kathleen was still trying to kill Henry, like the audacity, like the fact that she still doesn't see it, right? Like it's like everything about this just turned into survival. But I think bad people just, like there's just nothing, you know, it's like there's no common sense. It's like you're being attacked and still you want to kill this kid. And I think the creepiest moment was this infected kid. You know, at one point Ellie is sitting in the truck and this little kid that's infected comes rolling in, and it looks almost like a dance sequence. And the irony of Kathleen being killed by this infected kid, I was like, say less. You know, after all her talk about, you know, sacrificing, kids die all the time, you know, like it is what it is the life of one worth many? And the irony is she did the same thing, right? She risked everybody's life to kill Henry, and in the end it was all for nothing. So joke's on you, lady. And so I like how we went from like this chaos to this quiet motel. Like it just eerie. It's just like everybody's being killed and then just silence, right? And this final scene was really sad, because for a while they make you believe that maybe, just maybe, the four of them will make it out alive. And I had a feeling that something bad was going to happen, because At one point, you can see Henry and Sam during that infected raid. You know, they're being clawed at. And it doesn't take much to be infected. So I had a feeling that one of them probably got scratched or bit or something happened. But I was hoping that that wasn't the case. And so Henry and Sam kind of come to this agreement, right? Like there is that kind of like, okay, well, we'll take you as far as you can go. And Joel says something interesting. He's like, it's easier when you're a kid because there's no one relying on you, you know? Like their only hope to make it is if they themselves survive. And that's really eerie because there's really no one outside of them, right? Like, let's just say Joel doesn't make it to his brother. The odds of Ellie surviving is slim to none, right? They've never seen the outside world. And it occurred to me too that Henry also has never seen the outside world. I'm not sure what his experience is, but I suspect it's not that different from Ellie since they were all born probably during this pandemic. So really, everything is on Joel. And so we get to this final sad scene with Sam and Ellie, and I was happy for Ellie, and I was impressed by how she kind of took a parental role. And everything seems fine, but Sam seems very disturbed, right? Like he kind of is like, he's trying to stay up. He seems a bit rattled, and then randomly he asks her like, if you turn into a monster, are you still you inside? And that's an interesting question, like regardless of whether or not you turn into an infected person, right? Like you think about someone like Kathleen where she's just a monster on the inside, right? So this episode was one of the rare opportunities where we got to connect with someone before they became an infected person, right? Like all these infected were once people, right? It's not like they were born infected. And so that's quite terrifying to think of, right? So his thing is like, well, what's going to happen to me? And then he shows her the scar. And that decision not to tell Henry or Joel, like I understood the decision, but it also robbed Henry of saying goodbye. Because when they do wake up and Sam, you know, like when they realize that Sam is infected, like the shock, you know, like they're sleeping and then boom, they wake up and nobody knows what to do. Right? So I thought for a minute Henry was going to shoot Joel. Like you didn't know what was going to happen. And that lack of knowledge created this tension, right? Because Henry's in shock. He doesn't know what to do. Had he known the night before, maybe he could have said goodbye. Maybe he could have like done something, but that didn't occur to him, right? He didn't get that chance because Ellie didn't really give him that chance. And so when he shoots his brother, you know, he then shoots himself. And it was a cruel irony, right? Because the running theme of this whole episode is like endure and survive. And so because, you know, his little brother couldn't survive, Henry could not endure, right? His purpose for living has been obliterated. And so why is he alive? And so he shoots himself, right? So all of this happened in the heat of the moment. And, you know, end scene. All of this happened at the end of the moment. And Henry kept saying like, what did I do? What did I do? What did I do? Like, he couldn't live with the guilt. He knew he had to shoot him, but in that moment he couldn't really process his feelings. And so he just broke, right? Like there was really nothing else left. And I don't know how y'all feel about Ellie's decision not to tell Joel and Henry. I understood it, but at the same time, I think later when she saw how everything turned out, she felt bad, right? So when they're leaving, she kind of writes on his board like, I'm sorry. You know, she's sorry to Henry, she's sorry to Sam, she's sorry to Joel. Like, you know, there's really nothing she can do besides like learn from this moment. And I felt her remorse, right? Like I think she genuinely thought or hoped that Sam would be okay and they could just move on. And so, you know, like that there was a realization there that I can never do this again, right? And that made her sad. The final scene was quite terrifying because they're kind of back to where they started, right? Like they look like the only two people left on the planet, and then they just make their way, right? Like in this abandoned, you know, universe. And so that was a great episode from beginning to end. I felt really bad when Henry shot himself and said, like, that whole thing was really tragic. The show is very depressing, actually. Like, it's depressing because you can kind of see how this stuff can happen. You know, like you get attached to these characters you kind of understand their like motivations, and so they kind of balance it, right? So the minute someone terrible dies, someone you like also dies. So I don't know, like this is not for the faint of hearts, yo. Like I just sat there at the end, I was like, really, y'all? But it was good writing. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.